This is an edited for video version of the Digital Ed Discovery webinar, Making Video for Blended and Online Learning. It's now in 5 parts. In this part we're going to look at why video is important, how it can be used as a tool for online and blended learning, and the kind of things that you might need to think about in terms of scaffolding video into a student's educational journey. In part 2 we'll look at some things that are important to know before you start recording. So where can you put your videos? What kind of videos can you actually make? And when it comes to making videos, what are the legal requirements? Things like captioning, copyright, GDPR. In part 3, we'll look at how to get started making screencasts and visualizer videos and using things like a whiteboard. In part 4, we'll cover live action video and recording things in situ. And in part 5, we'll have a brief look at video editing. If you want to skip on to any of those parts, there should be links in the description below. Otherwise, let's go to the webinar. So first up, a bit about me. I'm a lecturer. I lecture predominantly in chemistry, and I've been using video in my teaching for the last 5 years. And I've kind of come to this because I used to work in the photography industry, printing film, and I spent quite a bit of time working with cameras. And really in the last 5 years, what's possible with video cameras now for a really reasonable budget hasn't been possible in the past. So this isn't about professional videography. It's about integrating the resources that we have available and that are within easy reach into our teaching to make high quality teaching materials that are really going to help our students. The sales pitch is why use video. There's a few different things. One, you can have a real impact on students' learning, and I'm going to show you a bit of that now in the next few minutes. And some of you may have seen some of these slides before, hopefully not all of you. But you really can show students things that otherwise they can't see. So particularly in a chemistry lab, probably in a kitchen, you can't expect a student to watch something cook over 20 minutes, but you can record that on TV or record that on video and show it back to them, and they can now understand something that they couldn't see otherwise. It can also make your job a lot more enjoyable. Anybody who's ever taught a first year lab and has had to say the same thing to 16 students 16 times, knowing that you can actually not replace all of that, but maybe replace 13 of those 16 interactions with here's a video that explains it. And then you can have much better interactions with the students where you can teach them other things that aren't the very bare basics. And hopefully it's going to allow for effective remote delivery, although that's really going to be tested now this coming September. The question is, people get a bit worried about this. So is video going to replace me? And I have to say that if your plan is just to make videos and put them up there and never talk to your students, then it's probably not going to work. Video resources really only work if you scaffold them into something else. So we'll get onto that as well. But before we start that, I want to start with a little exercise. So I want you to pause and go down to the link in the description below, click on it and watch the video. And the video is a test of selective attention. So pause the video now, open up the other video and watch it. I don't want any spoilers. When you've watched it, unpause and come back. So now that you've watched the video, the question is, how many gorillas did you see? At the webinar with the relatively small group, you can see that just slightly less than half of them missed the gorilla. This is pretty typical because I've run this on larger first, second and third year classes. And if you look at the statistics from the people who created this study, that typically about a third of your students will not see the gorilla, even though after being pointed out, it becomes incredibly obvious. And that's something that we can learn from when we're designing videos and thinking about videos as part of our scaffold for students' learning, is that yes, it might be blinding obvious if you're looking for it, but if you're not looking for it or you don't know to look for it, then it's possible that you're just never going to see it, even if it walks across the stage, beats its chest at you, and then walks again. And so it's really important when we're making videos that we realize that they're not standalone items and that in fact they're going to form part of a scaffolded learning structure for our students. And once we appreciate that, then all the other parts that we put together in terms of making our videos watchable and bringing our students into those videos start to make more sense. But it is really important that we bear it in mind when we go on to make videos. Anyway, back to the webinar. When you're making a video, you're calling attention to one thing or another, but students could be focusing on anything. And if the gorilla is what's relevant for them, then you're definitely going to spot the gorilla. But if it's not what's relevant for them and they don't know what to be looking out for, then they can watch all the videos in the world and they're never going to learn what you need them to learn. So videos have to form part of a scaffold. They have to form part of something where students watch a video because they are looking out for something in particular. And it is going to be a struggle in September, but learning is fundamentally, a social activity where you look for different things because other people say that they are important to you. So I think, that reasonably well demonstrates it. That when you're making your videos, you have to remember to put them into context. So I'm going to put my own work in a little bit of context, just to give you an idea of what I've done with videos and why I find them so useful. This is a student cohort that basically most of the videos that I have made have been given out to. I make them for the third years and the fourth years as well, but the first years are the ones that I use them and I think most effectively with. And there's about 323 of them, and they do about 20 labs. There's about 20 lab sessions a week of 16 students. So there's a lot of repetition, and there's a lot of the same thing happening. And the question for me was, could I scaffold something that would improve their teaching, that would mean that the people delivering those labs would have students coming in who had some idea what was happening in advance. And so going back a little bit, this was 2017-18 and even 2016-17. Basically, I took what were 22 groups at that stage, or about 20 groups at that stage, and I created a randomized control trial. So half of them got pre-lab videos and half of them got, as you can see on the right here, the control content, which was just having to read the lab book in advance. And then I'd give them a quiz, and that quiz would look at content that was covered by either the lab or either the video or the lab manual. And then we'd see how they got on in the labs. So this was the first kind of experiment that I did in, is video going to work? In doing this, it was all about creating a constructed workflow where the students had to engage with the video. I think if you just put up video, the students are not going to engage with it. So there was a penalty for not engaging, and they had to engage with one video, maybe a second video, and only when they had done that could they do the quiz, and that quiz was worth some number of marks. Not very many marks, but some number of marks. And the quiz was typically only a few minutes effort, but it still got them to engage with a few minutes of video. Now, in the original one, there was also another half for the other groups who were getting the text, but this is from a later Moodle. You can set up those restrictions. So workflows are really useful for getting students to engage in videos. Have to watch the video before you can try the exercise. Have to at least click into it. Now, all they have to do is click into it and skip to the end. So they don't actually have to watch it. But usually if you get them all the way to the video, most of them watch it. So grand, you can get them to work through, and it also means that you can monitor how many students are actually engaging from the Moodle perspective, and you can see, how many students, if you set up a progress bar, you can see how many students are actually working out each week. I'll show you some of the videos, but they were usually somewhere between 5 and 12 minutes, so short videos, and we'll get on to video length and scene length later, but usually the videos are quite short. And I think if you're going to make a video, it has to be short because the attention span isn't there, and you're better off making 5 short videos and linking them one after the other than trying to make a 50-minute video where students are expected to sit like a traditional lecture. So these are some of the videos that I made. Actually, this is just to give you an idea of what was going on. And the thing about them here is, if you look at them, if you look at the top left or along the left, they're looking at views that you can't otherwise see because the students aren't going to be able to either get up that close to something that's on fire or have the patience to be able to, there's not a possibility to both look at and show the student the thing that's happening in the bottom left. In the middle, it's just too dangerous, or we're looking inside a machine that isn't suitable for, you can't physically get inside there. And then on the right, we're just looking at things that are kind of repetitive, but require, instruction for the students. So the videos kind of cover all sorts of different topics, but they work quite nicely. The nice thing about putting videos up is that you can actually really closely monitor the engagement with your videos. So in term 2, 2016-17, there was about 15 views per student. So there was 2,200 views in total, 4 minutes, 4 seconds on average for the viewing time, which means that the students were only viewing maybe 50 to 60% of the video. But we'll get into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But to me, that's pretty good engagement. Most of the students are viewing some of the video. And actually, when you look at the videos, there's some parts of the video that are essential. And then even if you lose them after a few minutes, they at least know what they expect to see inside the laboratory. So they know what they're going to be doing. That data is through YouTube. I think Streams now offers a very similar service, but this was 4 years ago. We didn't have Streams. And actually YouTube offers different. That's a pretty old view in YouTube. YouTube views have changed slightly as well, but that's YouTube information. I also did a survey because I wanted to see, was this working? How do they feel? And in the randomized controlled trial, the students very definitely felt like they were more prepared for the lab, and like that material was helping them much more so than just reading the lab book. So there's a lot of evidence supporting the use of videos. There's also evidence saying that if you just give them videos and nothing else, it isn't going to help. And obviously, all of our students aren't at Open University, so videos aren't the only thing, but they can be really useful. It also helped in their quiz scores. So there was a nearly or just on the edge of statistically significant difference in terms of how the students got on in the quizzes. But from a lecturer perspective, it helps. It gets the students in. The students, before they go in the lab, they have actually seen what they're going to be doing, so they know what to expect. And so it gives them, they're better able to just interact with the things because they're not totally blindsided by coming into a lab and seeing things that are completely alien to them. And it takes a little bit of the cognitive load off doing whatever comes next. The students as well, they definitely like watching the videos, and they definitely, just based on interaction with the students, they preferred it much more to reading things. So it's a much better way of doing things than solely giving them text. That's kind of a sales pitch. The videos themselves definitely work. When I was making those videos, I would say it probably took me 6 to 8 hours per video, which is an awful long time. You'd end up spending a good chunk of Friday afternoon recording video, and then maybe 2 or 3 hours after that editing and putting on a voiceover. So the videos, they take time, and there are less, so they're all live action videos. There are less resource intensive, if you want to think about it that, ways of doing video recording. This is the general workflow that they sat into. So just to give you another idea, video, then a quiz, then a lab, then a post-lab video, maybe explaining calculation, and then more quizzes, and then maybe some feedback. And what I was getting around to on the last slide is that the kind of video that you see in the bottom left here, that's a lightboard video. And what it lets you do is just do calculations, but it also has a much shorter production time. You can record that video in basically as long as it takes you to stand there and write out your calculation, and then maybe another 10 minutes to download it, upload it, trim the ends off it. So you can make videos with a much shorter turnaround time. The lightboard looks something like this, and if you're interested, it's in room 929. Obviously, at the moment, you can't get into room 929. If you're in Sligo IT, I think Brian Mulligan has built a lightboard as well. This is the earlier view of the lightboard, and now it's looking a little bit more refined in room 929, but it's all set up there. All you have to do is write on the board and turn the camera on, and then you have your video file, and it's pretty useful. But we'll get on to that. The reason it's here is because I switched. So in the previous part, all of the first year videos were all live action videos showing them little bits of lab equipment, and now a good portion of the lab videos are actually me just standing in front of a board doing calculations. And the question is, are they any more or less useful, or does the video type change the student attention? And the answer is no, actually. We get about 1.5 views per video per student of the videos that I put up from the lightboard, which is pretty much equal to what you get from the live action videos. And you can see here that, so this was term 1, 2017-18. I put out 10 lightboard videos on 6 different topics over about 6 weeks, and you can see you get good engagement. That's the number of views per day. There's about 300 students, so nearly all of them view them. And then you can see actually later in term, a lot of the students come back to that content. So having that content there is going to be useful for the students because it's there for them to be able to re-engage with it. Now, I'm not going to give you a sales pitch on the lightboard, but it's there if you want to use it. Generally, if you structure that with quizzes and labs, you start to get pretty good engagement. So this is just the engagement statistics for that term from a Moodle perspective and a class perspective. And on average, the students then spend 35 minutes a week doing those things. So it wasn't a huge amount of time, but it made a fairly big difference to those students who came into the lab. Now, things are going to be slightly different if we're moving entirely online, but a lot of people were coming here said, I'd be interested in blending my lab or flipping the classroom or whatever it happens to be. This is a really, these kind of statistics tell you that you can get a lot of engagement from the majority of students, and that when they do engage, it generally works out well for them if it's in a well scaffolded environment. If you're interested in seeing some of the videos, my channel's up on YouTube. I'm sure there's a link somewhere else. And I just put up my videos on YouTube. They're available to the public, or some of them are, not all of them, but you can see them there. But when you put them up on YouTube, you get analytics. So part of the analytics you saw in the earlier slide, where I could see how many views from which particular cohort of people, or which particular link was giving me how many views per day, which is nice for tracking interaction. But the other thing that I said was that on average, students watch 4 minutes and odd of a video. And what's really useful is that you can then track, of those 4 minutes, what are they actually doing? And you can see in this slide here that in the first 10 seconds, about 30% of the students just stop watching. So about 30% of the people who click actually click in and then they click back out again. And that's fair enough. Lectures aren't mandatory, videos aren't mandatory, but it's there. And then of the students who do stay in, you can see that the majority of them make it most of the way through. So it stays at pretty much 60% all the way through. And then what else you can see, which is quite interesting, is if you see where I have the red bar in the middle of that graph, is what's going on at that time in the video. To that point, you have an upturn. So more students watch that point in the video, which means that they're actually going back to rewatch that part. So that tells me one of two things. Either the video itself doesn't clearly explain what's going on there, or I've reached a crucial point of understanding. You know, if you start looking at the analytics, you can actually get an interesting insight into how your students are interacting and how they're behaving and how they actually make sense of what you're doing. And this, you know, this is pretty good. You know, most of the students, when you get to about 4 minutes 10, you can see it starts to decline off. And that's because I've probably started saying, that's how you do that. And then I start talking to them about other things that are not really relevant. And the last 5 or 10 seconds, I'm saying, okay, I'll see you in the lab or whatever. You can look at that relative to other YouTube content, if only to, you know that your videos are reasonably well retaining their audience. But you can also compare different videos. So this is a typical likeboard video, and you can see on average 54% viewed. And this is a similar duration lab video, and you can see on average 45% viewed. Now, there are caveats to that. That's not necessarily my student population. That's a public viewing that. So if I were to take it from the GMIT population only, those graphs would look slightly different. But it generates or demonstrates the point that of the people who are interested in the video, who know after the first 10 seconds, a lot of them stay for the vast majority of the material. And then you can see interesting points within your video or points where you just lose attention. So is video going to be useful? Hopefully, yeah. You can have a look. So at this point, I'm just going to switch over to my YouTube and give you some idea of what analytics are available in video hosting platforms. I think it's more useful than just putting up on a slide. Okay, so let's have a quick look at analytics. So there's a few questions that you might want to ask. I suppose the very first is, are people looking at my videos? Then you might want to ask, well, if they are looking at my videos, how much of my videos are they watching? That's really important for students. And then, is it my students or who is watching my videos? And how are they finding my videos if it's not my students? So if you go to studio.youtube.com and you have a YouTube account, you'll see something similar to this, your analytics channel. And so you can click, this is the main dashboard. If we click down here, we can go into the analytics and we can explore the channel analytics. It gives you a default view where it shows you what's been happening in the last 28 days, the last 4 weeks, the last 48 hours, who's watching what videos. So you can tell immediately whether or not your videos are being watched in the last few days or in the last month. And it gives you some idea of what's going on. On top of that then, it's often useful to look at individual videos. So let's just take the top video here. And you can have a look at its default analytics and you can see, you know, it's been viewed so many times in the last 24 hours, but it'll also show you what's actually going on in terms of audience retention. So how many students or how many people make it all the way to 7 minutes and 51 seconds of video? And the answer is only 8% of viewers in this case, or actually 6.4% of viewers make it all the way to the end. But what you can also see is that many viewers end up at 1 minute and 54 seconds. In fact, many students either skip to that time or once they get past it, go back. And again, you've got a little bump down here. So by looking at that, you can actually get a pretty good idea of, you know, what parts of the video are more interesting or less interesting. Now, it's pretty normal in a YouTube video that you get maybe 50% fall off after the first 10 seconds, depending on, the particular content of your video. Not everybody who goes into your video necessarily wants to watch it, but they don't necessarily know that before they've clicked in. So we can tell that people are watching this video. We can see that on Friday the 24th of April, a lot of people watched it compared to the normal background where some people watch it. So we also know that on average they watch 2 minutes of it, but that obviously varies quite a bit from person to person. There's other questions that we might want to know as well though. So who's watching it? Where are these views coming from? Well, YouTube gives you some indication about traffic sources. So there's a few different possibilities. They could be coming from YouTube search, which we can have a look at, or they could be coming from external links. Other possibilities are that they're coming from suggested videos. If you watch one YouTube video, then it will suggest another one, and so on and so forth. So one place that's useful to look at is the external traffic source. Now, during the college year, you would expect one of the external sources to be your own university. I can see here that some other institutions have made use of the video, so it's a great way to share your video resources. But you can see all the various different places that have linked in, and you can see right down the bottom here, GMIT, there's only been one view in the last month, but that's really not surprising because the lab that this relates to was months ago. Whereas for other people or other sources, then it's now, it's obviously what they're doing in the last, or on the 20th of April or the 22nd of April. You can also see that some of it's coming from Google search, although you can't actually see what the search terms are, so it's not too useful. So we can also look at other videos that are suggesting my video or where they're coming from, or you can look at the search terms that appear on YouTube. And it's interesting to see where they're coming from. It's not necessarily going to help you design better videos, but it can definitely help you describe your videos more accurately so that people who want to get to your video are putting in the right search terms, and almost as importantly, people who don't want to get to your video aren't getting to it by using search terms that you think should get to them. Okay, so there, how people are getting to your video. What about who's getting to your video? So, sorry, the last part then is audience. You can have a look at engagement and you can see, this is just a more detailed view. You can see how many hours it's been watched and the average view duration and so on and so forth. But we also want to have a look at the audience, and it'll tell us, if you have a very large number of views, it'll give you an accurate breakdown by country. If your country only has a small number of views, then GDPR means that it won't actually collect and give you the country by country information. But it gives you a reasonable breakdown. I can see that most of the people watching this video are in the 18 to 34 age bracket, which would fit with the profile that they are college age students. There's not much of a gender bias at all in terms of who's watching it, and most of them come from the United States. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of where my videos are going from or going to. But most useful is definitely the engagement information. So how much time are people spending watching a particular video, and where do they drop off, and what do they rewatch? And after that then, it's usefulness for teaching. It's useful to know that your students are watching it and how much of it they are, but outside that, not necessarily so useful for teaching. All right, there are similar analytics in Microsoft Streams. I'm not going to go through them. I'm not as familiar with them. YouTube analytics have been around. Certainly, I think they've been around quite a bit longer. But you can get the same kind of information. So are people watching? How much are they watching? Who are those people? And how are they getting there? Okay, back to the webinar. Okay, so that brings us to the end of part 1. In part 2, we're going to have a look at the different kinds of videos you can make, things you need to think about before you start making videos, where you're going to put them, and are there any legal requirements about the kind of videos you want to make. Then in part 3, we're going to have a look at making videos using screencasts and visualizers. In part 4, we're going to explore live action videos, lights, camera, action, and all the other parts that need to go with it. And then finally in part 5, a brief look at video editing. If you have any questions, post them below. Thanks.